of the music on the field, and even with the sound of muskets and some cannons going off, you can see they're unflinchable. That was supposed to go right at the end of the song. Oh, everybody's late. Now pay attention. How many of us can play an instrument? How many of us can watch and march in formation? How many of us can do both? A lot of practice, a lot of work, and a lot of effort goes into the pipe and drums. And if you get a chance to talk to them, they're a great group to learn some information from. And if you're young and you want an instrument that's going to annoy your parents, talk to them about the fife. And after the capture of Fort Erie on July 3rd of 1814, the Americans had marched north in a camp just south of the Chippewa River, where the British had a small fortification. In camp on July the 5th, after their July 4th celebrations, the British began to poke at them, sending forward some light troops, militia, and some of their indigenous allies out to poke at them. The Americans became frustrated by this and decided to retaliate, sending out their own light troops. Now, the American light troops coming out are a mixture of some regulars, some militia, and you'll also notice, oh, I should ask, are there any proud Canadians in the crowd? Give a cheer. Good news, we have a Canadian regiment on the battlefield right now. They're fighting for the Americans. The soldiers that you see with the green bands in their hats are the Canadian Volunteers, raised in 1813. Their commander was actually a former member of the legislature. I should say former. He was actually still holding a seat when he took the commission with the American military. And these guys were some of the hardest fighters, because guess what happens if they get captured? They don't get to be a prisoner very long. But good news for any good Canadians, I am proud to say Joseph Wilcox was killed at the siege of Fort Erie, their commander, and he is currently buried in an unmarked grave in Buffalo.
Yeah, that's nice.
Now, as you're watching the engagement, ladies and gentlemen, you're going to notice some of the staff moving up and down the lines in front of you, and they're carrying very large buckets. The Niagara Parks Commission has not received tax dollars since 1885, and they paid back those tax dollars within 10 years. So everything you're seeing here that the fort is putting on is either the generosity of volunteers or the generosity of folks like you coming out to the fort. So if you would like to see events like this coming again, or if you just want to say a thank you, reach into your pocket. If you got some coins, toss them in. If you got some bills, throw them in. If you throw in a $20 bill, you get an official handshake from yours truly, Daryl Learn. $50, I give you a hug. $100, I do not hug you. Now, it's interesting to note with the light troops how they're spread out. They take knees and they take their time with firing. Light infantry were not meant to break the enemy. They were meant to skirmish, scout, poke at the enemy formations. So they would spread themselves out, take aim, and try to hit as best they could. The regular forces coming out in the field, they are the hammer to come down on the anvil. Now, muskets had a lot of issues in this era. Being flintlocks means they're exposed to the elements. So every once in a while, you may notice a musket goes click instead of bang. That is normal. In humidity, with the musket fired repeatedly, it's going to get fouling, and something can go wrong, causing it not always to work. One of the methods to try to fix it is you do something called napping of the flint. This is where you tap at the edge of the flint to try to give yourself a new sharpened edge. And if you ever heard somebody say, "Don't get caught napping," that's what they're talking about. It's not falling asleep, because if you're napping your flint, guess what? You can't shoot back. Now, for those good Canadians, there's a Canadian unit on the field fighting for our side. You may have seen some green-coated troops coming out on the British side. Those are the Glengarry Light Infantry, a regiment raised in Upper Canada, what's today Ontario, mostly in what today would be like the Kingston, Prescott area. It was raised up primarily of Scots-Irish settlers in the area. They originally wanted to be a Highland unit and actually wear kilts out onto the battlefield, but then they saw the price tag and like a good Scotsman, they went, let's go cheaper. Now, the American regulars coming out into the battlefield, we expect to see the traditional American blue, but you're also going to see some gray in amongst the ranks. The Americans in 1812 faced a huge problem when the price of blue dye skyrocketed shortly after the war was declared. This is the consequence of declaring war on your blue dye supplier. So as the war progressed and blue dye got even more expensive, eventually by the end of the war, it was over 15 times more expensive than it was when the war began. The troops began to wear makeshift uniforms. Black uniforms, brown, green were worn, but in this area, the gray work jacket substituted. Winfield Scott's troops wore those at Chippewa and Lundy's Lane, and at Chippewa, gray-coated American regulars did something that not even Napoleon's Imperial Guard could do. They took on British regulars one-on-one, equal numbers on an open battlefield, and beat them. So the gray uniform lives on. If you visit West Point Military Academy, they do not wear blue. They wear gray. Chippewa and Lundy's Lane, just one of the reasons. The other one, just like those Scotsmen, it's cheaper. Now, during the Battle of Chippewa, the British light infantry performed very well out in the field with the support of the militia and the indigenous allies. But the American regulars, when they advanced across the field, they began to open fire with volleys like you're seeing here, multiple muskets firing together. I mentioned that muskets have an issue in which they don't always work. The other problem is most of them are smoothbore, so your accuracy is very poor. The idea was that by using mass firepower, somebody with a working musket has hit something. Even at 200 yards, the musket was rendered a very deadly weapon. But it produces a brand new problem, smoke. You're seeing the smoke that's created out here with just the troops that are here. You can imagine at battles like Lundy's Lane where there's 3,000 muskets going off and almost a dozen cannons. The field could become so choked with smoke you couldn't see what you were shooting at. So the uniforms of the time period were designed that if you stepped out of the smoke, it screamed out, "Don't shoot, I'm on your side." So everybody thinks the red is silly, but guess who didn't get shot by their own side? The bright red. Bright blue was good for this as well, but what happens to those Canadians in green or the Americans in gray? They get shot at by everybody. At Lundy's Lane, the Glengarrys would lose more of their men to the British than to the Americans due to confusion in the smoke. And at one point, Winfield Scott's graycoats for 20 minutes were caught between the two battle lines.
Center will advance! Left! Right! Left! 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 Right! Left!
Yeah, he's the guy.
Clean your pans. Clean your plates. Commence firing! My companies are on the right! Water.
That guy, yeah.
Why is he out?
Fire!
Oh, poor guy, yeah. He was brave taking it that early. Oh, yeah. I was taking it from the east. Yeah. Well, once they get back over him. Good deal. There was he burned through more powder. You know what I mean? It's a nice thing, you know. Hello. Not that it's for the lantern later too. My wife is coming here. Where does the lantern too? Good, good. Yeah? Good? What does it feature? I don't feature vignettes. It goes from the fourth half to the night. There's also gunfire going off. Yeah, include things like
Someone's gonna walk back up there again.
interrogated officers crime lane. And it goes from one to the other, bam, bam, bam. About 20 minutes or so, 30 minutes. All of that. It's a lot of fun, and like this film is only ever. Yeah, no, it's that was told it starts in the welcome center. So yeah, that's where you gotta go to. After the battle, it's about half an hour before the tourists and they come down. Alright. So really they start more about 9:30. Alright. Yeah, oh closer to yeah.
Having issues already.
We want people
with the guns, muskets. Misfire going up.
Out of my day off, I couldn't choose when I did days off because I'm a entertainer physician.
Oh, sure. So yeah.
So we're walking back up again?
To the battle.
At the Battle of Lundy's Lane, one of the American units lost 15th. The pole had been shattered in multiple places and could not be used again. In this era was modern soldiers are trained to think independently and move about. Everybody is a gear in a grand mechanism. You do not have a purpose other than to work for the mechanism. The soldiers were stressed to suppress that and fight alongside one another, and strong camaraderie was built amongst them. Excellent volley from the British line there. Gives me an example of what smoke can do with a few good volleys. I mentioned that camaraderie. It's interesting to note there were many records from both sides during the war of soldiers noting that they wished to flee if they cleared their fellow soldiers to prisoners. And the British officer, he's advancing forward with his cap off, usually a sign that he is looking to parley. Battles tended to end either in confusion or with an agreement. Lundy's Lane ended in confusion. After multiple assaults and a thick smoke, the Americans presumed that the British had finally withdrawn from the battlefield and felt that they could too withdraw from the battlefield, having lost so many men. As they fell back across the battlefield, the British, launching their final attack, pressed to the ridge to discover the Americans gone. Unable to see them in the smoke and the dark, they also presumed the enemy had left the battlefield. So both ended up claiming victory. Now removing your hats amongst fellow officers is a old sign of respect towards one another. This is something you would do going back to the medieval era, where you would open up your visors and let someone know that you did not give them as a threat, nor did you come as a threat. And actually, if you think of how your hand would look when you would raise a visor, it looks a lot like a salute. This is one of the origins of the modern salute. But ladies and gentlemen, as the battle is coming to a conclusion, it is important to remember that we are on a battlefield. Hundreds, if not thousands, died in and around this area. It was a brutal engagement, and the people out on this field know and recognize this. Their interpretations are meant to bring the history to people who may not know it well, and to not celebrate the fighting, but celebrate the individuals who came out here and did what they had to. And as a sign of respect to them, a lament is a tradition amongst the reenacting world. And during the playing the lament, we ask, ladies and gentlemen, that you please remove your caps and remain silent during the playing.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for all of the reenactors who have come out here this weekend. The reenactors put a huge amount of effort, a huge amount of research, resources, everything into putting together these impressions and coming out. If you are at all interested in getting a closer look as they go into their camps, feel free to talk to some of the reenactors. The only thing we ask is don't pick up anything unless they expressly say you can. That one should be obvious. And secondly, if a tent is closed, don't go in it. Even if it's open, don't go in it. They're living in there, and you do not want memories you cannot forget.